When Roger Federer speaks about tennis, people listen. It doesn't matter that he retired a few years ago or that the game has evolved in ways even he probably didn't anticipate. His opinion still carries weight, still generates headlines, still shapes how we think about the sport. So, when Federer recently commented that he sees similarities between his own playing style and that of Carlos Alcaraz, it wasn't just a passing observation. It was a statement that demanded a response, and yesterday Alcaraz gave us exactly that, along with some fascinating insights into how he views the modern game and his place within it. The context here is important. Federer made his comments during an interview at a charity event in Zurich, where he was asked about the current state of men's tennis and which players remind him of the style he brought to the court during his legendary career. Without hesitation, he mentioned Alcaraz. "There's an elegance to Carlos's game that I appreciate," Federer said. "He plays with variety, he comes to the net, he's not afraid to take risks and go for winners. It's not exactly the same as how I played, but there are definitely similarities in the approach, in the mentality of wanting to dictate rather than just react." Coming from an 18-time Grand Slam champion and arguably the most aesthetically pleasing player to ever pick up a racket, that's high praise. Alcaraz's response came during a press conference ahead of the Miami Open, and you could tell he'd been thinking about Federer's comments since they were made. "It's an incredible honor that Roger sees something of his game in mine," Carlos began, a genuine smile crossing his face. "Growing up, I watched him play so many times, studied his matches, tried to understand how he could make everything look so easy when I knew it wasn't. So to have him say that there are similarities, it means a lot to me personally." But then Alcaraz did something interesting. He took the comparison further, extending it to the broader landscape of men's tennis and specifically to his biggest rival. "If Roger sees similarities between us, then I think it's fair to say that Sinner's game has similarities to Djokovic and in some ways to Roger as well," Alcaraz continued, leaning forward as he got more animated. "Jannik plays with this incredible consistency, this baseline dominance where he just doesn't miss. He can wear you down, make you feel like there's nowhere on the court that's safe. That's what Novak did for so many years, and Roger had elements of that too, especially later in his career when his game became more about efficiency and precision." It was a comparison that immediately sparked debate across tennis social media and among analysts trying to parse out exactly what Alcaraz meant. The thing is, comparing playing styles in tennis is always a bit reductive. Every great player has unique elements that make them who they are, combinations of technique and tactics and physical attributes that can't be perfectly replicated. But there's also truth in recognizing patterns, in seeing how certain approaches to the game get passed down or emerge independently across generations. When you watch Alcaraz play, there are absolutely moments that evoke Federer, the way he transitions from defense to offense in an instant, the willingness to come forward and finish points at the net, the variety of shots he can pull out when he needs them, his drop shots, his touch volleys, even some of his movement patterns around the court carry echoes of the Swiss maestro. But Alcaraz is also very much his own player, with elements that Federer never really had in his arsenal. The raw power on his forehand is more reminiscent of Nadal at his peak, that ability to hit through opponents with pace that makes their rackets vibrate. His defense, his ability to track down balls that seem impossible to reach and somehow get them back in play with interest, that's something he shares more with Djokovic than Federer. And his mental approach, the way he plays with joy and visible emotion on court, that's uniquely Carlos. So when he accepts Federer's comparison while also extending it to Sinner and Djokovic, he's engaging in a really sophisticated conversation about what makes modern tennis work at the highest level. The Sinner-Djokovic comparison is particularly interesting because it's not one you hear as often as you might expect, but once Alcaraz said it out loud, it made immediate sense to anyone who's watched both players closely. Jannik Sinner has built his game on relentless baseline consistency, on hitting the ball early and flat and deep, on moving opponents around until they break down or make an error. His forehand and backhand are almost equally dangerous, both struck with minimal margin for error but maximum effectiveness. He doesn't give you rhythm, doesn't give you time, doesn't give you easy balls to work with. Sound familiar? That's basically Djokovic's blueprint for dominance over the past 15 years. Djokovic revolutionized the baseline game by proving that you could be aggressive without taking huge risks, that you could dominate matches by simply being more solid, more consistent, and more mentally tough than everyone else. He turned defense into offense better than anyone in history, and his ability to redirect pace and hit winners from seemingly defensive positions became the template for the modern baseline grinder. Sinner has clearly studied that approach and adapted it to his own game, adding his own wrinkles like his devastating serve and his willingness to move forward when the opportunity presents itself. But where Alcaraz's analysis gets really nuanced is in his mention of Federer in relation to Sinner. Roger had elements of that too, especially later in his career when his game became more about efficiency and precision. This is a sophisticated observation because it recognizes that Federer's game evolved significantly over his career. Early Federer was all attacking flair and aggressive shot-making. Mid-career Federer was a more complete player who could beat you in multiple ways. Late-career Federer, especially after he came back from his knee injuries, was a player who had learned to conserve energy, to be more economical with his movements, to win matches with precision and placement rather than just overwhelming opponents with shot-making brilliance. That later version of Federer actually does share some characteristics with how Sinner plays now. The flat, penetrating ground strokes, the emphasis on taking the ball early and not giving opponents time, the clinical efficiency of making matches look easier than they actually are. It's a comparison that probably wouldn't have occurred to most casual fans, but it makes sense when you dig into the details of how these players construct points and manage matches. What makes this whole conversation even more fascinating is what it reveals about how these young players view themselves and each other. Alcaraz isn't just accepting a compliment from Federer and moving on. He's engaging with it, extending the analysis, showing that he thinks deeply about the tactical and stylistic elements that define top-level tennis. When he talks about Sinner's similarities to Djokovic, there's respect there, but there's also strategic insight. He's essentially saying, I know what I'm up against when I play Jannik. I understand the tradition he's coming from, the approach he's using, and that helps me figure out how to compete with him. Their rivalry has already produced some incredible matches over the past year. Alcaraz won their semi-final at the French Open in a 5-set thriller that had people comparing it to some of the great matches of the Federer-Nadal era. Sinner got revenge at the US Open, outplaying Carlos in the final with that exact baseline dominance we're talking about. They've split their head-to-head encounters pretty evenly, and each time they play, it feels like we're watching the future of men's tennis taking shape in real time. The fact that they're both thinking about their games in these historical contexts, drawing these comparisons to the big three, suggests they understand the stakes and the legacy they're competing for. There's also something poignant about these comparisons because they represent the passing of an era. When Federer talks about seeing himself in Alcaraz, he's acknowledging that his time is done, but also that elements of what made his game beautiful are being carried forward. When Alcaraz talks about Sinner and Djokovic, he's recognizing that Novak's dominance is winding down, but that the approach he perfected is alive and well in the next generation. These players aren't just competing against each other. They're inheriting and adapting the legacies of the greatest players who came before them. During the press conference, Alcaraz was asked if he thinks these stylistic differences will define his rivalry with Sinner, the way the stylistic contrasts between Federer and Nadal or Federer and Djokovic defined those great rivalries. Absolutely, he said without hesitation. Jannik and I play very different brands of tennis, and I think that's what makes it exciting for fans. When we play, it's not just about who's playing better that day, it's about which style is going to win out, Which approach is going to be more effective under those specific conditions? He paused, choosing his words carefully. With Roger and Rafa, you had the grace and variety against the power and topspin. With Roger and Novak, you had the attacking elegance against the defensive consistency. With Yannick and me, I think it's something similar. My game is about variety and aggression and trying different things, while his is about relentless pressure and not giving an inch. That contrast makes every match between us feel important. It's a mature and thoughtful way to frame the rivalry, and it shows that Alcaraz understands the narrative elements that make tennis compelling beyond just the results. People don't just want to see great matches, they want to see different philosophies of the game clash. They want to see contrasting styles produce different kinds of drama. The Federer-Nadal rivalry became iconic, partly because it was genuinely unclear for years which approach was superior. Was it better to take the ball early and dictate with aggression, or was it better to generate massive topspin and grind opponents into submission? They went back and forth for nearly a decade and a half, and we never really got a definitive answer because both approaches were so effective in the right hands. Alcaraz and Sinner seem to be setting up a similar dynamic for the next decade. Carlos brings the variety, the shot-making brilliance, the attacking flair that can blow matches open in minutes. Yannick brings the consistency, the baseline power, the mental fortitude that can wear down even the most talented opponents. Sometimes Alcaraz's variety and aggression will be too much for Sinner to handle. Other times, Sinner's relentless consistency will frustrate Alcaraz into errors and poor decisions. The back-and-forth nature of their rivalry so far suggests we're going to be debating which approach is better for years to come. One of the reporters at the press conference asked Alcaraz if he consciously tries to model his game after Federer, or if the similarities are just natural. "I think it's a bit of both," Carlos admitted. "When I was younger, I definitely studied Roger's game, tried to understand how he constructed points, how he used slice and variety to keep opponents off balance. Some of that probably seeped into my game without me even realizing it. But I also think we just have similar instincts as players. We both like to take risks, to go for winners, to make the court our own. That's not something you can really teach. It's just how we see the game. It's an honest answer that acknowledges both influence and innate style, and it reinforces the idea that great players are always some combination of what they learn and who they naturally are. The comparison to Federer also puts a certain kind of pressure on Alcaraz, whether he acknowledges it or not. Federer's game was beloved not just because it was effective, but because it was beautiful, because it looked effortless, because it embodied a certain ideal of what tennis could be at its highest level. If Alcaraz is going to carry that torch forward, there's an expectation that he'll continue to develop that variety, that willingness to take risks, that commitment to playing attractive tennis, even when a more conservative approach might be safer. So far, he's absolutely lived up to that standard. His matches are must-watch television, his highlight reels go viral, and even when he loses, you rarely see him playing ugly, defensive tennis. But the question is whether he can sustain that over a full career while also accumulating the titles and achievements that will define his legacy. Federer managed to do both. He was entertaining and successful, beloved and dominant. But it took him years to figure out how to be both consistently, and there were moments early in his career where the flashy play led to inconsistent results. Alcaraz is still young enough that he can afford some of that inconsistency, but if he wants to reach the heights that Federer reached, he'll need to find that balance between entertaining tennis and winning tennis. As for Sinner, being compared to Djokovic is both a compliment and a challenge. Djokovic is the most successful player in the history of the sport by many measures, but he's also never received the same level of adoration from fans that Federer and Nadal enjoyed. His game, while incredibly effective, doesn't inspire the same aesthetic appreciation. It's clinical, it's efficient, it's sometimes almost robotic in its precision. If Sinner follows that path, he'll probably win a lot of matches and a lot of tournaments, but he might also find that he's always fighting for fan support against the more flamboyant Alcaraz. Then again, Djokovic eventually won over a lot of fans simply by being so good for so long that you couldn't help but respect what he was doing. Sinner might follow a similar trajectory. Right now, he's still building his reputation, still proving that his baseline dominant style can win Grand Slams consistently. But if he spends the next decade competing at the highest level, winning titles, and pushing Alcaraz the way Djokovic pushed Federer and Nadal, he'll earn his own place in tennis history, regardless of whether his game fits the classical ideal of beautiful tennis. The broader point that emerges from all of this is that tennis remains a sport where style matters, where how you win is almost as important as whether you win, and where the great players are always in dialogue with the champions who came before them. Federer commenting on Alcaraz and Carlos responding by bringing Sinner and Djokovic into the conversation creates this wonderful continuity across eras. It reminds us that tennis isn't just a series of isolated tournaments and results. It's an ongoing story where each generation builds on what came before while adding their own chapters. As the 2026 season unfolds, these stylistic comparisons are going to be tested over and over again. We'll see Alcaraz and Sinner face off in big matches, and every time they do, we'll be watching not just to see who wins, but to see which approach proves more effective under the specific circumstances of that match. We'll be looking for moments where Alcaraz's variety and aggression overwhelm Sinner's consistency, and moments where Sinner's relentless baseline game frustrates Alcaraz into errors. And through it all, we'll be thinking about Federer and Djokovic and Nadal, about how these young players are inheriting and adapting the legacies of the Big Three. In the end, Alcaraz's response to Federer's compliment reveals a player who's thoughtful about his place in tennis history, who understands the traditions he's part of, and who's eager to engage in the ongoing conversation about what makes great tennis great. Whether he ends up being the true heir to Federer's legacy, or whether he carves out something entirely his own, the fact that he's thinking about these questions at 22 years old suggests we're watching someone who has the potential to be much more than just a talented player. We might be watching someone who could define tennis for the next decade, who could give us rivalries and matches that we'll remember for the rest of our lives. And if that happens, these early conversations about playing styles and comparisons to the Big Three will look like the first hints of something truly special taking shape before our eyes.